last month, the head of the Department of External Affairs of the Moscow Patriarchate, Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev, visited Pope Francis. And I mean, everybody can see quite clearly that his mission was to try to get Francis to say something that the Moscow Patriarchate could use against this effort towards a recognized Ukrainian autocephay, and also elevate Moscow in its ecclesiastical political struggle with Constantinople. Well, he didn't quite get what he was after. Pope Francis is, after all, a Jesuit. And Jesuits are very highly educated. They're trained to think very critically and to use language wisely. And so Pope Francis said, "Oh, I don't want the Catholic Church to at all get involved in this situation. There can only be one patriarchate in Russia, and that is in Moscow." Well, that's not what Metropolitan Hilarion was looking for. What he was looking for was that the Patriarch of Constantinople should not encroach upon the territory of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. Well, instead what he got was, there can only be one patriarch in Russia, and that is in Moscow. Well, so the Pope seems to be playing into the Russian side, but in fact he's not. He's saying that Russia should have its patriarch, and it should be in Russia, and it should be the Moscow Patriarch, obviously, just common sense. But he abstracts from the question of Ukraine purposely, and sometimes silence speaks more eloquently than words. Now, what he says about Ukrainian Greco-Catholics, he says he doesn't want the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church to get involved in politics, and especially in this question. That's basically, this is not a quote, but it is kind of a summary of what he's saying. Well, very well. I mean, the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church would not want the Ukrainian Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox to try to influence internal matters in the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church. So it makes sense for us to do the same vis-a-vis the Ukrainian Orthodox and the Moscow Patriarchate. It makes sense for us not to agitate for something. However, that doesn't mean that I, as a scholar, as an educator, can't help people to understand what is going on. I hope that I presented things fairly, even if I was critical of notions like Moscow being the mother church for Kyiv. that's just a statement of historical facts that don't make sense. They don't pass muster. But I think it's good for the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church to stay out of politics. As a matter of fact, one of the hallmarks of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church is that it is very wary of relations between the state and the church that get a little too close. The best example of which is the Moscow Patriarchate, the Russian Orthodox Church. Both now, there's a very cozy relationship between the Moscow Patriarchate and Vladimir Putin. But this was true back during Tsarist times, when Metropolitan Andrey Sheptytsky warned his own people that you don't want to ever have an established church, a church that is recognized as representing the government, because that church then has to take orders from the government. And one of the main reasons that the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church had to be liquidated after World War II, when Stalin consolidated control over Western Ukraine towards the end of the Second World War and immediately afterwards. One of the main reasons why he had to destroy the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church was because he couldn't control it the way he could control the Russian Orthodox Church. Why? Because the ultimate authority always is in Rome, with the Pope of Rome. So the infiltration of the hierarchy and the clergy that was such a tragedy in the Russian Orthodox Church under the Soviet Union, that would have been checked by the influence of Rome. And so that church had to be destroyed because it couldn't be controlled. And for Ukrainian Greco-Catholics, the protection of an outside authority, in this case in Rome, is extremely important. And I think that perhaps for Ukrainian Orthodoxy, having the Patriarch of Constantinople reaffirm the relationship, the mother-daughter relationship between Constantinople and Kyiv, also could serve a similar purpose. Although it's not as clear in Orthodox canon law as it is in Catholic canon law, that where the Pope can actually intervene if he sees something fishy going on. But having someone outside of the country who has your interests at heart is very important, because Ukraine is on the way. It's building its democracy. It wants to be a democratic country, always proclaiming that it wants to be European, as opposed to Eurasian, which is another way of saying the Russian model. Democracy is something that Ukraine is striving for. It hasn't totally arrived yet. There's rampant corruption. Many of us pray during the Divine Liturgy that the Lord grant our brothers and sisters in Ukraine freedom from foreign aggression and from internal corruption. Well, that internal corruption means that a government which today champions Ukrainian Orthodox autocephaly could also try to stick its fingers into the affairs of Ukrainian Orthodoxy. And as a Ukrainian Greco-Catholic, I personally, and I believe most of us, are frightened at that idea. Now, Metropolitan Andrey, who was the first one to really emphasize that this is a problem, church-state intimacy that's a little bit too strong. He is also the one who said, if ever we can get to the point where the Ukrainian Orthodox Church could reestablish communion with Rome, we would gladly. He was head of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church. He says, I have no pretensions. I don't want to be the head of a united Christian church in Ukraine. The Orthodox are the majority. You folks take the lead. But this relationship that we have with Rome is important to us. And that's why in the 1990s, and this is mentioned in the article in the National Catholic Register, in the 1990s, although the mistake is he says it was in the late 1990s, in fact it was in the early and mid 1990s, the Kyivan Church Study Group existed, and it was a voluntary gathering of bishops and theologians, clergy and lay theologians, of, on the one hand, the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church, and on the other hand, of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and churches under its homophorion. So that included the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the United States, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, and it included such eminent Orthodox authorities as then Bishop, now Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, the late Archimandrite Ephrem Lash, and a whole series of important Orthodox theologians. The two chairs of this Kyivan Church Study Group were on the Orthodox side, Archbishop Vsevolod Maidansky, who was under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and Bishop Basil Lawston from the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church. They were the conveners of this Kyivan Church Study Group. And the Kyivan Church Study Group really had as its core mission to study whether it is at all possible for the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church to reestablish full and visible communion with its mother church, the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and thereby with the whole Orthodox Christian world, but without breaking its existing full and visible communion with the Church of Rome. And the interesting thing is, I was one of the founding members of that group, and we visited Rome, and there we were told, well, we can't imagine how that could possibly work, but please keep working at it. And then we visited the Fanar, we visited Patriarch Bartholemew, and he said, God bless you, I read every issue of Logos, the journal that the Sheptytsky Institute puts out, where all the papers of the Kyivan Church Study Group were published. in the 1990s. He said, I read every word that you folks publish. I don't know how it could be possible to achieve this goal that you've set for yourself. But please keep working at it. And so both from Rome and from Constantinople, we received this encouragement. We had a series of wonderful meetings. The problem was that we wanted to have our next meeting. We had met in Oxford, we had met in Ottawa, in Stanford, in Rome, in Istanbul. But we wanted the Kyivan Church Study Group to meet in Kyiv. But the problem in the mid-1990s was that if you spoke to one of the contesting parties, the Moscow Patriarchate, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kyivan Patriarchate, or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, then the other two wouldn't talk to you. And so it was a situation in which we couldn't continue that conversation with in the place where where the majority of Ukrainian Greco-Catholics and the majority of the Ukrainian Orthodox live, in Ukraine, and to discuss the Church of Kyiv and its future based on its history, to discuss the Kyivan Church in Kyiv. It was impossible to do. But there are some of us who hope that that dream can continue, and especially if Patriarch Bartholemew reaches out to the millions of faithful, Ukrainian Orthodox faithful, who are longing for this, who deserve this, and gives them a tomos of autocephay. Then I am sure that Ukrainian Greco-Catholics will say, okay, now we can talk to you without a foreign power influencing our conversations. How great is this situation? We believe that we were divided by circumstances that came from the outside, the Greco-Catholics from the Orthodox in Ukraine. And if left to our own devices and the grace of God, perhaps we could find a way to reestablish the Church of Kyiv as she was in the days of Saint Volodymyr the Great. That's our hope.